He wanted to see how much agony a human child could endure before he broke. Hundreds must have heard those blood-curdling screams, but nobody did anything. The council knew, of course, the high and mighty representatives of 100 species. They just didn't care. Suban tech was too valuable, their cloaking devices too powerful, so the council let those twisted butchers do as they pleased. The boy's dad, just a humble farmer, begged the council to help, to save his son, weeping and pleading. They called his boy's torture an internal Suban matter, saying primitive humans should shut up and let superior races handle things. Can you believe that? The sheer unmitigated gall to ignore a father's pleas. John's hands trembled as he piloted his rickety shuttle back to Earth. He had failed his boy. Those soulless bureaucrats on the council had turned their backs, content to let a child suffer for their political gain. But John wasn't done fighting, not by a long shot. He flew straight to the EDF Central Command Center, a towering fortress bristling with cannons and swarming with steely-eyed soldiers. John marched right up to the gate, still wearing his dirt-stained overalls from the farm. "I need to speak to whoever's in charge." "It's urgent," John said, his voice hoarse from hours of useless pleading before the council. The guards looked him up and down, noting the wild desperation in John's eyes. They must have seen something there, a father's indomitable will to save his child, because they waved him through. John found himself standing before Admiral Samir Patel and General Ling, the top brass of the EDF. These were men who'd seen countless battles, who'd stared down the worst the galaxy had to offer. "Sir, I'm John Sanders. My boy, the Suban have my boy. They're torturing him, and the council won't lift a finger. Please, I'm begging you." Patel held up a hand, his eyes narrowing. "We know who you are, Mr. Sanders. We've been monitoring your son's situation." Ling leaned forward, his jaw set. "We've seen the evidence of what those sadistic bastards are doing. Rest assured, we have no intention of letting it continue." John nearly collapsed with relief. Finally, someone was listening, someone willing to act. Patel and Ling wasted no time. They sent a single blunt message to the Galactic Council: return the human child and any other prisoners, or prepare for war. The council scoffed at the ultimatum. Humanity was a minor species, a footnote in galactic history. What could they possibly do against the might of 100 worlds? They soon found out. The EDF had been busy, quietly building its strength, developing weapons and ships that far outstripped anything the galaxy had seen. And now, a massive human fleet appeared in Suban space, an armada that dwarfed the Suban defenses. The galaxy watched in stunned disbelief as sleek human battleships, their hulls gleaming with advanced energy shielding and bristling with plasma cannons, stared down the Suban forces. It was a sight no one had ever expected to see. The primitive, pacifistic humans had transformed into a military juggernaut overnight. The retribution hung in the void, an avenging angel poised to strike. A flotilla of EDF battleships flanked the flagship, their weapons primed and ready. On the bridge, Admiral Patel stood ramrod straight, his eyes fixed on the view screen displaying the Suban research station. "Hail them," Patel ordered, his voice calm but laced with steel. The comms officer nodded, fingers flying over the console. A moment later, the sneering face of Hector, the Suban chief scientist, filled the screen. Admiral Patel, Hector drawled, his tone dripping with condescension. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" Patel's jaw tightened. "You know damn well why we're here, Hector. Release the human child and any other captives immediately." Hector threw his head back and laughed, a cold, cruel sound that echoed through the bridge. "Oh, Admiral, you humans, always so sentimental." He leaned forward, his eyes glinting with malice. "The boy is Suban property now. We'll do with him as we please." Patel's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "You sick bastard. If you don't comply, you'll what?" Hector sneered. "Attack us? Please, your primitive ships are no match for Suban technology." As if to punctuate his point, Hector tapped a button on his console. The view screen split, revealing a second image. Patel's blood ran cold. It was the boy, John's son, strapped to a table. Suban scientists swarmed around him, wielding scalpels and syringes. The child's screams tore through the audio feed, a wrenching, primal sound of pure agony. On the bridge of the Retribution, the crew stood in horrified silence. Patel's breath came in short, sharp bursts, his entire body shaking with barely contained rage. "That," he said softly, "was a mistake." Patel turned to his weapons officer, a hard-faced woman named Lu. "Fire," he said, his voice like ice. Lu nodded, her fingers already dancing across the console. "Aye, sir." In an instant, the EDF ships unleashed hell. A storm of kinetic rounds, plasma beams, and graviton torpedoes slammed into the Suban station, the barrage so intense that the view screen whited out for a moment. When the image cleared, the station was a ruin, gaping holes torn in its hull, fires raging across its surface. The Subin ships, sleek and deadly, swarmed out to meet the EDF fleet. They opened fire, their advanced weapons lancing out toward the human ships. But it was futile. The EDF's shields absorbed the blows, shrugging off the Subin assault like raindrops against a window. "Their shields are down," Lu reported, her voice rising with excitement. "We're tearing them apart." Patel leaned forward, his eyes hard as he watched the Subin ships burst into flame, one after another. They were no match for the EDF's might, their vaunted technological superiority proven to be nothing more than a hollow boast. In mere minutes, it was over. The research station was a shattered husk, the Subin fleet reduced to drifting debris. On the bridge of the Retribution, the crew erupted into cheers, hugging and clapping each other on the back. But Patel remained stoic, his gaze fixed on the ruined station. "Send in the Marines," he ordered. "Find that boy and any other survivors. And if Hector is still alive, bring him to me." His voice dropped to a whisper, a cold promise of retribution. "I want to look him in the eye before we put him down." But the battle was far from over. Admiral Patel and General Ling weren't about to leave that boy behind, not after all he'd suffered. They gathered an elite team of EDF Marines, the toughest sons of humanity had to offer, and personally led a boarding party onto that ruined hellhole of a station. The Marines stormed through the smoke-choked corridors, their boots pounding against the metal deck. Suban soldiers popped out from every shadow, their weapons spitting plasma, but the EDF troopers were quick on the trigger, gunning down the bastards before they could even scream. Patel and Ling fought their way deeper into the station, toward the hidden labs where unspeakable atrocities had been committed. They blasted through sealed doors and mowed down squads of Suban guards, their faces grim and splattered with alien blood. And then, in a dark chamber reeking of chemicals and suffering, they found him, the boy, John's son. He was strapped to a metal table, his small body a patchwork of cuts, bruises, and needle marks. Blood pooled beneath him, and his breathing came in ragged gasps. For a moment, Patel and Ling could only stare in horror at what had been done to this innocent child. Patel stepped forward, his hands shaking as he tore away the restraints. He lifted the boy in his arms, cradling him like he was the most precious thing in the universe. Ling took point, his rifle raised and ready as he scanned for any remaining threats. "I've got you, son," Patel whispered to the barely conscious child. "You're safe now. We're taking you home." The Marines formed a protective circle around Patel and the boy, their weapons bristling outward as they fought their way back to the shuttle bay. Suban soldiers threw themselves at the human formation in waves, desperate to recapture their prized test subject, but the EDF troopers put them down with cold efficiency, their rifles flashing in the dim emergency lighting. The corridors echoed with the sounds of battle, the staccato bursts of gunfire mingling with the anguished cries of the dying Suban. The air was thick with smoke and the acrid scent of burning flesh, but the Marines pressed on, driven by the determination to save the boy and bring him home. At last, they reached the shuttle. Patel carried the boy aboard while Ling and the Marines held off the last frantic Suban assault. The hatch slammed shut, and the small craft lifted off, blasting away from the ruined station and back toward the waiting EDF fleet. In the shuttle midbay, doctors swarmed over the boy, stripping away his blood-soaked rags and assessing his injuries. Patel watched from the doorway, his face a mask of barely contained rage. This child, this innocent, had suffered horrors beyond imagining, and for what? The twisted curiosity of some sadistic alien fiends. As the shuttle docked with the Retribution, a transmission from the Suban homeworld burst across the view screens. It was Hector, his face contorted with fury and madness. "So you think you've won, humans," he snarled, spittle flying from his lips. "You've only sealed your doom. We will hunt you to the ends of the universe. We will flay the skin from your bones and use your skulls." As Patel stepped forward, his eyes hard as iron. He stared directly into Hector's holographic face and spoke 6 words that would echo through the ages: "You should have let him go." From the bridge of the Retribution, Patel stared at the view screen, his face chiseled from stone. On the surface of the Suban homeworld, cities burned, skyscrapers toppled, crushed by the relentless bombardment from the EDF fleet. Plasma beams lanced down from the heavens, vaporizing entire city blocks in the blink of an eye. "No mercy," Patel said, his voice cold as the void of space. "They showed none to our children. We will show none to them." The Suban scrambled like ants whose hill had been kicked over. Ships lifted off from spaceports, desperate to escape the apocalypse raining down upon them. But the EDF had planned for this. A wall of human steel surrounded the planet, an impenetrable blockade that stretched as far as the eye could see. Suban ships, sleek and swift, raced toward the gaps in the net, hoping to slip through and flee to safety. The EDF guns thundered in response. Kinetic rounds tore through hulls, spilling bodies and debris into the void. Plasma beams sliced ships in half, leaving them drifting as molten wreckage. With a flick of his wrist, Patel cut the transmission. He turned to Ling and the other officers on the bridge, his voice low and filled with a terrible, righteous anger. This is only the beginning. The Subin, the Council, the whole damn galaxy, they think they can torture our children and get away with it. They think humanity is weak. They're about to learn how wrong they are. Patel clenched his fist, his knuckles white against the dark fabric of his uniform. We're going to burn them, every last one of them. We're going to hunt them down and make them pay for what they've done. And when we're finished, the galaxy will never forget the day they crossed the human race. This is Admiral Patel of the Earth Defense Force, Patel said, his voice booming across every frequency. Your atrocities end now. Any further aggression against humanity or any other species will be met with the full might of the EDF. On the surface, Subin soldiers rushed to defensive positions, manning anti-orbital cannons in a desperate attempt to fight back. The EDF answered with a rain of graviton torpedoes, bunker-busting warheads that cracked the planet's crust and sent shockwaves rippling through the Earth. The cannons fell silent, crushed beneath tons of rubble. We offered you a chance for peace, Ling said, his eyes hard as he watched the destruction unfold. You chose torture and cruelty instead. Now you pay the price. The Council ships hung at the edge of the system, a glittering array of 100 races. They watched in stunned silence as the EDF meted out its merciless judgment. A few, the boldest, tried to intervene, their ships darting toward the battle. Patel turned to the comms officer, his eyes narrowing. Open a channel. Wideband, all frequencies. The officer nodded, his fingers flying over the console. Channel open, sir. This is a message to the Galactic Council, Patel said, his voice ringing with authority. The Subin's crimes against sentient life are unforgivable. We are doing what you lacked the courage to do. Do not interfere, or you will share their fate. There was a moment of silence, a held breath across the stars. Then, slowly, the Council ships began to turn away, their engines flaring as they fled back to their own worlds. They had seen the fury of humanity unleashed, and they wanted no part of it. On the Retribution's bridge, the crew watched as the last of the Subin ships was shattered, their wreckage joining the growing debris field around the planet. The once great civilization, the scourge of the galaxy, was no more. All that remained was a broken husk of a world, its surface scarred by the wrath of an avenging humanity. Patel turned away, his eyes hard and cold in the light of the burning planet. This is just the beginning, he said, his voice a low growl. The galaxy will learn to fear the name of humanity. And God help any who stand in our way. The medics worked furiously over David's broken body, their faces grim and their hands steady. They reset shattered bones, stitched together torn flesh, and pumped him full of antibiotics and painkillers. It was touch and go for weeks, the boy hovering on the brink of death, his vital signs spiking and plummeting like a roller coaster. But David was a fighter. He clung to life with the same tenacity that had kept him sane through months of torture. Slowly, painfully, he began to heal. His wounds closed, his bones knitted, and color returned to his pale cheeks. When he finally opened his eyes, clear and lucid for the first time since his rescue, Admiral Patel was there at his bedside. The grizzled soldier held the boy's hand, his voice soft as he spoke. Welcome back, son. You're safe now. And I promise you, we'll make sure no other child ever suffers like you did. David's story spread like wildfire across the galaxy. Every newsfeed, every download channel, every data stream carried the tale of the boy who had endured the unthinkable and survived. He became a symbol of humanity's resolve, a reminder that even the weakest among us could be unbreakable. But while David healed, Hector plotted. The Subin scientist had managed to slip away in the chaos of the bombardment, stealing a ship and vanishing into the depths of space. He was a broken man, his life's work destroyed, his people scattered to the winds. But his hatred for humanity burned hotter than ever. In the dark corners of the galaxy, Hector gathered the remnants of the Subin military soldiers, scientists, spies, anyone who had a grudge against humanity. He forged alliances with other races who had been humiliated or defeated by the EDF, promising them a chance at revenge. They called themselves the Vengeful Claw, a name that struck fear into the hearts of humans across the stars. They were a shadow army, striking without warning and vanishing before the EDF could respond. Human colonies burned, outposts were reduced to rubble. The Vengeful Claw left no survivors, only shattered bodies and smoking ruins. But the EDF was not about to let these atrocities go unanswered. Admiral Patel and General Ling mobilized every ship, every soldier, every weapon at their disposal. They vowed to hunt down Hector and his minions to the ends of the universe if need be. And they had a secret weapon, one that would strike terror into the hearts of the vengeful Claw. In the depths of the EDF's most secure research facilities, scientists had been hard at work, building on the technology they had captured from the Suban. They had created a new breed of soldier, one that was faster, stronger, and smarter than any human or alien. They called them the Avenging Angels, and they were ready to unleash hell on the enemies of humanity. David moved through the shadows of the lunar base, his enhanced senses alert for any sign of the vengeful Claw. Behind him, his fellow Spartans fanned out, their weapons at the ready. They had trained for this, honed their skills to a razor's edge. They were humanity's best hope against the twisted remnants of the Suban. As they approached the central chamber, David's augmented hearing picked up the sound of muffled sobs the hostages. His grip tightened on his rifle, the cool metal a comforting weight in his hands. He signaled to his team, and they took up positions around the entrance. With a silent countdown, they breached the room, flashbangs and smoke grenades rolling across the floor. The vengeful Claw soldiers, caught off guard, fell before they could even raise their weapons. David and his team moved with ruthless efficiency, cutting down the enemy with precise bursts of gunfire. And then, through the clearing smoke, David saw him, Hector. The Suban scientist stood at the far end of the room, a cruel smile twisting his features. He held a detonator in one hand, his finger poised over the trigger. "Ah," the famous Spartan's Hector sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "I was wondering when you would show up." David trained his rifle on the Suban's head, his finger resting on the trigger. "It's over, Hector. Release the hostages and surrender, or we'll take you down." Hector laughed, a harsh, grating sound that echoed off the metal walls. "Oh, I don't think so. You see, I've rigged this entire base to explode. One press of this button, and we all go up in flames." David's eyes narrowed, his enhanced vision picking out the details of the detonator. It was a dead man's switch. If Hector released the trigger, the bombs would detonate. He calculated the odds, his mind racing through 1,000 scenarios. There was only one way this could end. "Spartans, take him down," David barked, his voice ringing with authority. They moved as one, a blur of speed and power. Hector's eyes widened in shock as the Spartans closed the distance, their movements too fast for his Suban reflexes to follow. A volley of stun rounds slammed into his chest, sending him crashing to the floor. David was on him in an instant, his boot pinning the Suban's hand to the ground, the detonator still clutched in his grasp. He reached down, his fingers closing around Hector's throat. "This is for every child you tortured," David growled, his voice low and dangerous. "For every life you ruined, for every atrocity you and your kind committed." Hector's eyes bulged, his free hand scrabbling at David's unbreakable grip. But it was useless. The Spartan's strength was unmatched, his resolve unshakable. As the light faded from Hector's eyes, David felt a sense of grim satisfaction. Justice had been served, the victims avenged. But he knew this was only the beginning. The vengeful Claw was still out there, scattered across the galaxy, and he and his fellow Spartans would not rest until every last one of them was brought to heel. David rose to his feet, the detonator clutched safely in his hand. He turned to his team, their faces grim beneath their helmets. "Secure the hostages and set the charges. We're burning this place to the ground." As the Spartans moved to comply, David allowed himself a moment of reflection. He thought back to that scared, broken child he had once been, strapped to a table in a Suban lab. He had come so far, endured so much, and now he was more than just a survivor. He was a protector, a guardian of the innocent, and God help any who stood in his way. David roared as he lunged at the nearest vengeful Claw soldier, his fists smashing into the alien's face with a sickening crunch. Around him, his fellow Spartans fought with equal ferocity, their enhanced strength and speed now reduced to merely human levels by Hector's insidious device. "Fall back," David bellowed, ducking under a hail of plasma fire. "Regroup." His words were cut off as a massive vengeful Claw enforcer slammed into him, sending them both tumbling to the ground. They grappled, rolling across the blood-slicked floor, each trying to gain the upper hand. The enforcer snarled, his clawed hands scrabbling at David's throat. But the Spartan was not so easily defeated. With a grunt of effort, he brought his knee up, driving it into the enforcer's groin. The alien howled, his grip loosening for just a moment. It was all David needed. He surged upward, his hands closing around the enforcer's neck. With a savage twist, he snapped the alien's spine, the body going limp in his grasp. But there was no time to rest. More vengeful Claw were pouring into the room, their weapons spitting death. The Spartans fell back, forming a tight circle, their rifles barking as they tried to hold off the tide of enemies. "There's too many of them," one of the Spartans shouted, his voice tight with strain. "We can't." And then, like a miracle, the tide turned. From behind the vengeful claw lines, a new sound arose, screams of pain, howls of rage. The aliens turned their attention, drawn by this new threat. It was the colonists, armed with nothing more than metal pipes, wrenches, and sheer desperation. They surged forward, falling upon the vengeful claw's rear with a fury born of months of oppression and fear. The aliens, caught between the Spartans in this new attack, faltered. Their lines broke, their discipline shattered. David saw his chance. Now he roared, charging forward, his team at his heels. They crashed into the vengeful claw like a tidal wave, their fists and rifle butts rising and falling in a brutal rhythm. Side by side, Spartan and colonist fought. They were battered, bloodied, but unbroken. In that moment, they were more than soldier and civilian. They were humanity, in all its stubborn, defiant glory. Hector screamed orders, his voice shrill with rage and fear, but it was too late. His troops were routing, fleeing before the onslaught of the very people they had sought to subjugate. David pressed forward, his eyes locked on Hector. The Suban scientist backed away, his hand scrabbling for a weapon. He raised a plasma pistol, his finger tightening on the trigger. But David was faster. He leaped, his hand closing around Hector's wrist. The pistol discharged, the bolt searing into the ceiling. David wrenched, the bones in Hector's arm snapping like twigs. The Suban screamed, the sound cut off as David's fist connected with his jaw. Hector crumpled, his body sprawling across the floor. David stood over him, his chest heaving, his knuckles bloody. Around him, the battle was ending. The last of the vengeful claw were either surrendering or fleeing. The colonists were cheering, their voices raw with emotion. But David felt no joy, no sense of victory, only a grim determination. This was just one battle, one small victory in a war that was far from over. He reached down, his hand closing around Hector's collar. He dragged the unconscious Suban upright, his eyes hard. "Get him to the ship," David growled. "Admiral Patel will want a word." He turned his gaze, sweeping over the room, taking in the wounded, the dead, the survivors. His team, battered but alive. The colonists, their faces alight with a new hope. "This isn't over," David said, his voice a low promise. "Not until every last one of the vengeful claw is brought to justice. Not until the galaxy is safe from their cruelty." He looked to the stars, visible through the shattered windows, his jaw set. Out there, somewhere, the remnants of the vengeful claw were hiding, licking their wounds, plotting their revenge. But they would not hide forever. David and his Spartans would find them, and they would end them, no matter the cost. Flames roared around David as he charged through the inferno, his eyes locked on Hector's sneering face. The Suban scientist stood amidst the chaos, his hand clutching a small device. With a cruel laugh, he pressed a button, and a shockwave rippled outward, slamming into David and his fellow Spartans. David felt his enhanced strength drain away, his muscles suddenly leaden. Around him, his team faltered, their power armor sparking and shorting out. Hector grinned, raising his plasma rifle. "Not so mighty now, are you?" But David didn't slow. Even diminished, he was still a Spartan, still a warrior. He crashed into Hector, knocking the rifle from his hands. They grappled, rolling across the burning ground, trading blows that would have shattered ordinary men. Around them, the battle raged on. Colonists and Spartans fought side by side, facing down the vengeful claw with sheer grit and determination. Plasma bolts crisscrossed with tracer rounds, the air thick with smoke and screams. David hardly noticed. His world had narrowed to Hector, to the feel of Suban flesh beneath his fists. They rose together, stumbling through the flames, their armor scorched and blackened. Hector's eyes widened as he saw the nullification device, still clutched in his hand, begin to spark and shake. "No," he whispered. "No," the explosion was blinding, a wall of fire and force that consumed everything in its path. David felt the heat wash over him, felt shrapnel slice through his armor. He clung to Hector, refusing to let go, even as the flames engulfed them both. For a long moment, there was only the roar of the inferno, the crackle of burning flesh and shattering bone. David and Hector locked in a final, fatal embrace. Then silence. The flames flickered and died, leaving only ash and ruin. The colonists and Spartans, those who had survived, stared into the smoking crater, hardly daring to breathe. For a long moment, there was only the roar of the inferno, the crackle of burning flesh and shattering bone. David and Hector locked in a final, fatal embrace. Then silence. The flames flickered and died, leaving only ash and ruin. The colonists and Spartans, those who had survived, stared into the smoking crater, hardly daring to breathe. A figure stirred in the ash and rose slowly, unsteadily. It was David. His armor was gone, his skin blistered and raw, but in his hand he held Ector's severed head, the Suban's face frozen in a final scream. A cheer went up from the colonists, ragged and weary. The Spartans, though still standing, raised their fists in salute. David limped towards them, his face grim. The battle was won, Ector was dead, his vengeful claws scattered, but the cost had been high. David looked out over the field of ash and bone, at the scorched corpses of colonists and Spartans alike. This was victory, but it tasted of blood and bitter ashes. The hush that fell over the galaxy in the wake of David's victory was deafening. In the halls of the Galactic Council, representatives from 100 worlds sat in stunned silence as the evidence of the Suban atrocities was laid bare. Hollows of tortured human children, their small bodies broken and bleeding, played on an endless loop. Testimony from the survivors, their voices shaking with barely suppressed rage and grief, echoed through the chamber. And at the center of it all stood David, the scars of his battle with Ector still fresh, his eyes haunted by the horrors he had witnessed. He spoke softly, but his words carried the weight of worlds. "You knew," he said, his gaze sweeping over the assembled counselors. "You knew what they were doing, and you did nothing. You let them torture and murder, and you called it politics." There was no response, no defense in the face of such undeniable truth. Even the most silver-tongued politician could find no words. In the end, there was only one course of action. The Suban were cast out, their seat on the council stripped away, their territories divided, placed under the watchful eye of the EDF and its allies. It was a humiliation, a castration of a once proud empire. But for David, there was no satisfaction in this victory. The wounds he carried, both physical and mental, ran too deep. In the weeks and months that followed, he was hailed as a hero, his name spoken with reverence by the people of Earth and beyond, but he found no comfort in their praise. The memories of his torture, of the friends he had lost, plagued him in the quiet moments, when the cheers faded and the cameras turned away. He could feel the weight of it all bearing down on him. He tried to lose himself in his work, throwing himself into mission after mission with reckless abandon, but each victory felt hollow, each defeat afresh wound upon his soul. In the end, it became too much to bear. One day, without warning or fanfare, David simply disappeared. He left behind his medals, his accolades, and vanished into the vast emptiness of space. Some say he sought redemption, a way to atone for the lives he had taken. Others whisper that he could no longer bear the weight of his own legend, the expectations of a galaxy that saw him as their savior. But the truth, as always, is more complicated. For David, there could be no peace, no solace until he confronted the demons that haunted him. And so he wandered, a ghost among the stars, seeking a way to make sense of the scars he bore. Years passed, and the galaxy moved on. The EDF, bolstered by its victory over the Suban, grew in strength and influence. The Galactic Council, chastened by its failure, vowed to do better, to be better. But the scars of what had happened could never truly heal. The memory of those tortured children, of the brave soldiers who had given their lives, lingered like a shadow over all. And so when people speak of the Suban War, they do so with a heavy heart. They remember the heroism, the sacrifice, but also the price paid in blood and tears, in shattered lives and broken dreams. It is a reminder, a caution, of the toll that war takes on the soul. And it is a lesson that the galaxy, in all its infinite wisdom, seems doomed to learn again and again. For in the end, as the saying goes, only the dead have seen the end of war. And for those who survive, who carry the scars both seen and unseen, the battle never truly ends. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel. For every comment that says I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.